She was standing at the bus stop in the rain when I first saw her. Not waiting for a bus, just standing there like she had forgotten that was what bus stops were for. She just said, "I don't know where I'm going." I looked at her for a moment. "That's okay," I said. "Come on." "Hi, my name is Miles Calloway. I'm 38 years old and I run a small bed and breakfast on the shore of Cedar Lake in Vermont. 7 rooms, a wide covered porch, and a kitchen that smells like coffee and old wood no matter what time of day it is. My wife Clara built this place with me 11 years ago. We painted every room ourselves, chose every piece of furniture together, argued for 2 weeks about whether the porch swing should face the water or the tree line. She died 2 years ago. I run the place alone now. My neighbor Ruth comes on weekends to help with the rooms. My golden retriever Finn follows me from kitchen to porch to dock and back again like he's making sure I don't disappear. The guests come and go the way guests do. They drink their coffee, they take their photographs of the lake. They leave reviews that mention the homemade jam and the quiet. And most evenings, after the last guest has gone to bed and Finn has fallen asleep by the wood stove, I sit on the porch and listen to the water and try not to think too far ahead. That was the life I was living when the woman at the bus stop said she didn't know where she was going. And I told her that was okay. I had no idea, standing in the rain at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday in October, that those 4 words were going to change everything that came after. Her name was Willa Harta. She was 31, a photographer, or she had been, before the last 2 years had made it hard to believe she was still the kind of person who took photographs. She told me this sitting at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her jacket hanging over the back of the chair, Finn's head resting on her feet like they were old friends. She had left a city, a relationship, and most of what she'd owned 3 days earlier. The relationship had lasted 4 years. In the beginning, it had felt like stability. By the end, she couldn't remember the last time she had made a decision without checking whether it was the right one to make. She had stopped taking photographs. She had stopped calling her friends. She had stopped recognizing the person in the mirror. She had gotten on a bus going north with the money she had in her account and a backpack with 2 changes of clothes and her camera, still packed, lens cap on, not opened in 8 months. She had gotten off when the bus stopped being something she could afford to stay on. Cedar Lake had not been a choice. It had just been where she ran out of road. I listened to all of this without saying much. There wasn't much to say. I understood what it looked like when someone had spent a long time carrying something too heavy to name. When she finished, she looked around the kitchen, at the old copper pots hanging above the stove, at the mismatched chairs Clara had collected from estate sales, at Finn's water bowl with his name painted on the side in letters Clara had done herself one rainy Sunday. "I can pay you," Willa said. "I have some money left. Not much, but—" "You can have the corner room for now," I said. "We'll figure the rest out later." She looked at me like she was waiting for the catch. "Why?" I looked at my coffee mug. "Because the corner room has been empty for 2 months and it shouldn't be." She didn't push it. She just nodded and drank her tea. And Finn didn't move from her feet, which I had learned meant something. The first few days were careful. Willa stayed in her room most of the morning, came down for coffee, went out to walk the lakeshore alone. She didn't talk much, and I didn't push her. I had guests to take care of. A retired couple from Boston who wanted to kayak. A woman writing a book who needed complete quiet. And the kitchen didn't run itself. But I noticed things. The way she moved through a room. Slowly, like she was still deciding whether she was allowed to be in it. The way she held her coffee cup with both hands even when it wasn't cold. The way she sat on the porch in the evenings and looked at the lake without taking the camera out of her bag, even when the light was doing something extraordinary. On the 4th morning, she came downstairs before the guests and found me in the kitchen trying to fix the stuck drawer in the sideboard. She watched me for a moment, then said, "You're pulling at the wrong angle. The wood's warped on the left side. Try pushing in while you pull." I tried it. The drawer opened. I looked at her. "How did you know that?" "My grandfather had the same kind." She sat down and poured herself coffee from the pot like she'd been doing it for years. He had a whole house full of things that only worked if you knew the trick. We talked for an hour that morning, not about anything significant, about old furniture and the particular stubbornness of things that were made to last. By the time the first guest came down for breakfast, something between us had shifted. Not much, just enough. She started helping without being asked after that. Not because I needed help. Ruth was perfectly capable, but because she needed something to do with her hands while the rest of her was still figuring out where it was. She folded napkins. She cut flowers from the garden for the tables. She learned which guests wanted to be talked to over breakfast and which ones wanted to be left in peace. A skill, I told her, that most people never acquire. She smiled when I said that. The first real one I had seen. It was a small thing. I held on to it for the rest of the day without knowing why. October turned into November. The Boston couple left. The writer finished her book, or at least she announced she was going home to finish it, which she said was progress. 2 more guests came and went. Willa stayed. Neither of us talked about how long she was staying. It simply never came up, which I understood was its own kind of answer. She started taking photographs again in the 3rd week. Not of anything in particular at first. The dock in the early morning, the light through the kitchen window, Finn asleep in front of the stove. Small things, private things. She didn't show them to me and I didn't ask to see them. But I noticed the camera was coming out of the bag now and that the lens cap was in her pocket instead. One afternoon I came in from splitting firewood and found her at the kitchen table with her laptop open, going through a week's worth of photographs. She closed the laptop quickly when she heard me. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I wasn't looking." She didn't say anything. I went to wash my hands at the sink. After a moment, she opened the laptop again. I didn't turn around. I just stayed at the sink longer than I needed to. The photographs she was editing were extraordinary. I had seen the lake in every season for 11 years. She had been here for 3 weeks and had found angles of it I had never thought to look for. The early morning dock, the light on the water at 4 in the afternoon, Finn running through fallen leaves at the edge of the property, and one photograph, the view from the corner room window at dusk, the lake going silver and the tree line going dark. That looked like a place from a dream. I didn't say anything about the photographs that day, but something had settled in my chest, something that had not been there before. I went out to the porch and looked at the lake for a long time. Finn came and sat beside me, which he always did when he understood something before I did. There was a Sunday in November when the first real snow came. Not the tentative kind that melts by afternoon, the kind that meant business, that covered the dock and the porch and the garden in one long quiet sweep between midnight and morning. I came downstairs at 6 to find Willa already outside. She had pulled on her coat over what were clearly her pajamas, rubber boots, camera in hand, and she was standing at the edge of the dock in the snow looking at the lake, which had gone perfectly still and white at the edges. I watched her from the kitchen window for a while. She was very still, not cold still, focused still, the kind of stillness that happens right before a photograph. I made 2 cups of coffee. I put on my own coat and boots and brought them out. She heard me coming and didn't look away from the lake. She just held out her hand for the cup without turning around. I put it in her hand. We stood there in the snow, looking at the lake in the early light. After a while, she took 3 photographs in quick succession, the kind of burst that meant she had seen something and was making sure she caught it. Then she lowered the camera and drank her coffee. "What did you see?" I asked. She turned the camera so I could see the small screen. The lake in the new snow, the dock disappearing into white, the far tree line dark against a gray sky, and in the corner of the frame, barely visible, the kitchen light of the B&B reflecting off the snow. "The light from inside," she said, "the way it looked like the house was still awake." I looked at the photograph. It was extraordinary, not just technically, but in the thing it captured. Something warm and private seen from outside. Something that said a house was inhabited and cared for and still lit even when the world outside went cold. "That's the best photograph you've taken here," I said. She looked at it again. "I think so too." We stood in the snow and drank our coffee. Finn came out eventually, discovered the snow with theatrical enthusiasm, and destroyed the pristine surface of the front garden in approximately 45 seconds. We both watched him without saying anything. Later she told me that was when she understood she wasn't leaving. She didn't tell me until much later, but I think I understood it that morning too, watching her stand in the snow with her camera and her coffee and the particular stillness of someone who has found the thing they were looking for without realizing they were looking. Cedar Lake is a small town, roughly 600 people, 200 of whom have opinions about everything, and the other 400 who are just trying to get through the winter. The bed and breakfast had been known since Clara built it, and by extension, so had I. People noticed Wheela. Martha at the post office asked me if I had a new guest staying on. Old Dale from the hardware store mentioned he'd seen a woman with a camera down at the South Dock 3 mornings running. Ruth, who missed nothing, said simply, "She's good for you, Miles," and went back to making the beds, which was her way of announcing that the subject was closed. Nobody said anything unkind. This was Cedar Lake, not somewhere that specialized in cruelty. But the noticing was there. The small adjustments people make when they're trying to figure out what the shape of something is. I didn't know how to explain it because I didn't fully understand it myself. Willa was a guest who had stayed, that was all. She helped with the napkins and she took photographs of the dock and she had figured out the trick to the stuck drawer. That was the whole of it. Except it wasn't, and some quiet part of me was starting to understand that. The understanding arrived the way it usually does, sideways, through something small. A Thursday evening in November, the lake had gone completely still after a storm, the way it sometimes did, like it was listening for something. Willow was on the porch with her camera, and I brought out 2 mugs of coffee without thinking about it, handed one to her. She took it without looking away from the water. We sat there for a long time without talking. The lake was doing what the lake did. Finn was between us on the porch floor. After a while she said, "Clara." Not a question. I looked at her. She was still watching the water. "The flowers in the corner room," she said. "The embroidery on the chair cushions. The handwriting on Finn's bowl. She's everywhere in this house." "Yes," I said, "she is." "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes. Less than it used to." I looked at the lake. "Mostly it feels like company." Willa was quiet for a moment. I think she must have been very good at making places feel like home. I couldn't answer that for a moment. "She was the best I ever knew," I said. We sat with that for a while. The lake stayed still. It was the most honest conversation I had with anyone in 2 years. And it hadn't cost either of us anything to have it. The photographer arrived in December. Not a visitor, a professional, sent by a regional travel magazine doing a feature on Vermont winter retreats. His name was Garrett, and he spent 2 days photographing the property, the dock, the kitchen, the view from the porch. He was good at his job and entirely confident about it, and never once stopped talking about his work except when he was eating, which was frequent. On the second afternoon, he saw some of Willa's photographs on her laptop. She had left it open on the kitchen table, and he wandered past. He stopped. He looked for a long moment without saying anything. Then he said, "Who took these?" Willa was in the doorway. She said they were hers. Garrett looked at her with the specific expression of someone whose professional certainty has just been complicated. "These are exceptional," he said. "The lake in that first one, the composition. Have you worked professionally?" "I used to," she said. He asked if he could look through more. She hesitated, then said yes. I watched from the sink. I didn't say anything, but I watched the expression on Willa's face as Garrett went through her work, the way she kept waiting for him to lose interest and the way he didn't. When he left the next morning, he stopped at the door. "The Burlington Gallery, Anne Riley, send her the doc series, use my name." He wrote it on the back of his card and put it in her hand. "I'm not being polite. You have the real thing." She stood on the porch and watched his car go down the road. Then she looked at the card for a long time. I brought her coffee. She took it. Neither of us said anything. Garrett's card stayed on the kitchen windowsill for 2 days after he left. I looked at it every morning. The name he had written on the back, the Burlington Gallery director, a woman named Anne Riley, and the implicit instruction that Willa should send her work there. Willa didn't pick the card up. I watched her move around it like it was something she wasn't ready to touch. I knew why. Sending work meant believing the work was worth sending. 2 years of someone quietly convincing her it wasn't had left a particular kind of damage. On the third morning, I sat down at the desk in the office. I searched Willa's name. There had been a website, not active anymore, but a photography journal had archived her earlier work. Published, recognized, named in a list of emerging photographers 4 years ago. And then nothing. I knew why there was nothing. She had told me in pieces. I wrote an email to Anne Riley at the Burlington Gallery. I used Garrett's name. I attached 6 of Willa's photographs, the dock series, the light through the kitchen window, Finn and the autumn leaves. I told Anne that a colleague had recommended the work and I thought she should see it. I didn't ask Willa. I told myself I would tell her if anything came of it. That was the week after Garrett left. By Christmas, I hadn't told her. I kept finding reasons to wait. Daniel came on a Friday in December. He had driven up from the city, Willa's former city, her former life. He was exactly what I had imagined without ever having imagined him specifically. Tall, well-dressed, with the particular confidence of someone who believed that certainty itself was a kind of persuasion. He knocked on the door of the bed and breakfast and asked for Willa by name. She went pale when she saw him through the window. Not with fear exactly, with something more complicated. The expression of someone who had left something behind and is now watching it follow them. I stepped outside. "Can I help you?" He introduced himself. He was very polite. He wanted to talk to Willa. He said he had driven 4 hours. He said things between them had been left unfinished. He looked at the bed and breakfast, at the dock, at the wood I had stacked by the door, with the particular expression of someone trying to calculate how long a person could want to stay in a place like this. Willa came out. She stood on the porch, and I stepped back. Not far, but enough to give her room to handle it herself, which she would. I already knew that about her. They talked for 20 minutes. I stayed near the door. Finn stayed beside me, watching Daniel with the unblinking interest of a dog who has already decided something. I heard most of it. Daniel was apologetic, then persuasive, then something sharper underneath the politeness. The specific quality of someone who was accustomed to deciding where things stood and was unsettled to find that they no longer could. She said she was throwing her life away. He said she could come home. He said this, gesturing at the lake and the trees and the old porch, like this was something that needed to be said plainly. Willa was quiet for most of it. When she finally spoke, her voice was very even. "I'm not throwing anything away," she said. "I'm finding out what I had." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at me. I looked back. He left before dark. Willa sat on the porch steps after his car disappeared around the bend. I brought a blanket out and set it on the railing beside her. Not around her shoulders, just there, in case she wanted it. She picked it up after a moment and pulled it around herself. "I'm sorry," she said, "for him coming here. You have nothing to apologize for." "I know," she said. "I'm just sorry anyway." Finn came and sat on her feet. She scratched his ears without looking down. We watched the lake go dark. After a long time, she said, "I couldn't have sent him away like that 2 months ago." I looked at her. What changed? She thought about it. I stopped asking his permission to know what I wanted. I nodded. We sat with that until the cold drove us inside. The email from Anne Riley at the Burlington Gallery arrived in January. I saw it before she did. My email, since I had sent the original inquiry from my account. Anne wanted to discuss a potential showing. She had also passed the photographs to a colleague at a New York publication, the same one Garrett contributed to, who was doing a feature on emerging voices in regional photography. They were interested in 6 of the images and wanted to discuss more. I sat with the email for a long time. Then I printed it and put it on the kitchen table beside Willa's coffee cup before she came downstairs. I had already thought about how to explain what I had done. The email I had sent after Garrett left. The photographs I had attached without asking. The decision I had made on her behalf. I had thought about it enough to know there was no way to frame it that didn't require her to decide how to feel about it on her own terms. She came downstairs. She read the email. She was quiet for a long time. "You sent my photographs," she said. Not angry. Not quite anything I could name. Without telling me. "Yes." "Why?" I looked at my coffee. "Because you would have found a reason not to." She looked at the email again, then she set it down. "You were probably right," she said. "That doesn't mean you should have done it." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry." She was quiet for another long moment. Finn moved between us, which he did when he was uncertain about the temperature of a room. "Miles?" "Yeah, they want 6 of them," she said. Her voice was different now. Something underneath the careful control. "I haven't shown anyone 6 photographs in 2 years. I didn't say anything." She looked at the email one more time. Then she looked at me. "You should have asked." "I should have," I said. "I'm glad I didn't." She almost smiled. It was the particular almost smile of someone who wants to be angry and can't quite sustain it. "I'm going to call them," she said. "Then we're going to talk about what asking permission means." "Fair," I said. She picked up her phone and went to the porch. February came in cold and clear. The lake froze. Finn discovered that he loved the ice and had no traction on it, which led to a sequence of events I was still explaining to Ruth at the end of the month. Willa photographed all of it. The New York feature ran online. 6 photographs, her name, a short paragraph about her work and her return to Vermont landscapes. The gallery in Burlington confirmed a small showing in the spring. The travel magazine that had sent Garrett reached out through him to ask if she would consider doing a series on Vermont through the seasons. She handled all of it at the kitchen table, on her laptop. With coffee she made herself now because she had learned exactly where everything was. I watched her and understood something I hadn't quite let myself understand before. I understood that Willa Harte was not someone who had arrived here needing to be saved. She had arrived here needing space to become what she already was. Cedar Lake had given her that. The corner room, the stuck drawer, the kitchen smells, the lake in every light. And I had been the person who walked out in the rain and said, "That's okay, come in." I had given her the room and the coffee and the quiet and the porch, and she had given me back the sounds of a house that was alive again. The coffee for 2 in the mornings, the camera clicking from somewhere outside, Finn's habit of going to her room door in the evenings, the conversations over the kitchen table that lasted until one of us noticed it was midnight. I had not named what this was. I was not ready yet to name it, but I was no longer pretending it wasn't there. There was an evening in January when Clara's mother called. Eleanor Voss was 82, lived in Connecticut, and called every Sunday. She had been calling every Sunday since Clara died, which I understood was her way of keeping a connection to the place where her daughter had been happiest. I always answered. That Sunday, Willa was at the kitchen table editing photographs when the call came. I went to the other room the way I usually did for Eleanor's calls, because they were sometimes long and occasionally involved crying, which Eleanor and I had both agreed was not something either of us needed an audience for. I was on the phone for 40 minutes. When I came back, Willa had made dinner. Nothing elaborate, just soup from the pot on the stove and bread she had sliced herself, and set it on the table and sat down to wait. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "I know," she said. I sat down. She poured me tea without asking. We ate for a while without talking. The fire was going. Outside, the January dark was the specific kind that made the kitchen feel smaller and warmer by contrast. "Eleanor?" she asked after a while. I looked at her. "I didn't mean to listen," she said. "She has a very distinctive voice." She does, I said. She'd like you. She likes people who are direct. Willa looked at her soup. You've told her about me. She asked who was here, I said. She asks every week. For 2 months I said a guest. And now? I looked at the table. Now, I said Willa. She was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face that she didn't try to name, and neither did I. What did she say? She said good, I said. She's been worried about the quiet. Willa looked at her tea. So has everyone else, apparently. They were right to be, I said. She looked up at me. Something direct and honest and entirely her own. Miles. Yeah. I'm not going to be here forever, she said. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't want to make you promises about things I can't see yet. I know, I said. I'm not asking for promises. She held my gaze. What are you asking for? I thought about it honestly. Right now? Soup, I said, and someone to sit across from. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled, the slow, real one. Okay, she said. I can do that. We finished dinner. Eleanor had made me promise to call her back the following Sunday and tell her how things were going, which I had said I would, which was its own kind of answer. The letter came in March. The New York publication, the one Anne had contacted, the one Garrett had contributed to for years, had run the 6-photograph feature in February. The response had been significant enough that their editor was now writing to offer Willa a position as a contributing photographer for their ongoing regional series. It was a real offer. Good contract, reasonable travel, the kind of work that would put her name in front of people who built careers. She told me at dinner. She read me the letter and then set it on the table between us. I understood what the letter meant. It meant New York. It meant the life she had left behind, but better this time on her own terms, with her own name on it, without anyone deciding for her what it was worth. It was everything she should have had 2 years ago. It's a good offer, I said. Yes, she said. She was looking at the letter. It is. We ate for a while without talking. The fire was going. Finn was in his usual spot. Outside the window, the lake was doing what it always did in March, still mostly frozen but with the first dark lines of moving water appearing at the edges, the first signs that something was changing. When do they need an answer? I asked. 2 weeks. I nodded. I was looking at my plate. You should take it. She didn't answer right away. I looked up. She was looking at me with the particular expression she had worn sometimes in the first weeks, the one that was trying to read something. Should I? I held her gaze. There was a great deal I wanted to say. There was a great deal that had been building for months in the particular way things build in a house that has gone from quiet to alive again, in the morning coffees and the porch evenings and the conversations that lasted until midnight. But I also understood something about what she had come here to find. Not a place to stay. A place to become herself again. I want you to have everything that was taken from you, I said. The work, the name, the life, all of it. She held my gaze. That's not an answer. I looked at the window. The lake at the edge of the ice. I know, I said. 10 days passed. Willa didn't sign the letter. She also didn't not sign it. She left it on the kitchen table, and we both moved around it without mentioning it. I made coffee. She took photographs. Finn ran on the ice and fell over. The lake kept thawing at the edges. I didn't tell her to stay. I didn't tell her to go. I had decided that this was not a decision I had any right to make for her. I had already sent her photographs to a gallery without asking. That was the limit of what I was permitted to do without her consent. The rest was hers. On the 11th morning, I came downstairs before dawn the way I always did. The kitchen was still dark. Willa was sitting at the table with both hands around her coffee mug and the unsigned letter in front of her. She looked like she had been there for a while. I went to the counter and made my own coffee without turning the lights on. The kitchen in the early dark, the smell of the coffee, Finn lifting his head from his bed and deciding it wasn't time to get up yet. I sat across from her. Neither of us said anything for a while. She was looking at the letter, then she looked at me. I keep trying to decide, she said. And I keep coming back to the same thing. What thing? She turned the mug slowly in her hands. I spent 2 years not knowing what I wanted. And then I came here, and slowly, without planning it, I started to know again. She paused. I know what I want to photograph. I know what I want my mornings to look like. I know what kind of quiet I need, and I know what kind of noise I can live without. I waited, and then I try to put New York into that picture, she said. And I keep looking for the part that's missing. And the part that's missing is... She stopped. I looked at her across the table in the early dark. The coffee was warm in my hands. The lake outside the window was something I had looked at for 11 years. Miles. Yeah. I spent 2 years not knowing where I was going, she said. I think I finally do. I set my cup down very carefully. Then stay, I said. Not then stay with me. Just then stay. Because the decision had to be hers. She looked at me for a long moment. Something in her face that I had seen building for months finally arrived completely. Something settled and certain and entirely her own. Okay, she said. Simple as that. Finn got up from his bed and walked to her feet and lay down, which was his way of agreeing with things he thought were obvious. Outside, the lake was thawing at the edges. The first light was coming up behind the tree line. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. She didn't move it away. She just turned it over and held on. Some things don't need more words than that. Some things just need two people to sit still long enough to understand what they already know. Spring came to Cedar Lake the way it always did, all at once, too quickly, like it had been embarrassed about how long winter had lasted. The lake opened up completely. Finn reclaimed the dock. The porch swing came out of storage. Willa turned down the New York offer. She sent them a letter that took her an afternoon to write, which she read to me when she finished. It said she appreciated the opportunity and hoped they would consider her work again in the future, but that she had decided to stay where she was for now. She said it clearly and without apology, which was how she said things that mattered. The Burlington Gallery showing opened in April. 7 photographs, the 6 I had sent and one more she had added herself. A winter morning image of the B&B porch with the snow and the wood smoke and the light in the kitchen window. The one that looked, she said, like the first morning she had come downstairs and understood she was somewhere she could breathe. Ruth came to the opening. Old Dale from the hardware store came. Martha from the post office came and bought a print of the autumn leaves and Finn photograph, which she said she was putting in her living room, which for Martha was the highest possible praise. Garrett came too, driving up from the city, and spent the evening telling people he had spotted her first, which was not entirely true but was close enough that neither of us corrected him. I stood with Willa near the winter morning photograph for most of the evening. People came and went and said things about the images, and she talked with them in the way she had learned to talk again, directly, with genuine pleasure, like someone who had remembered what it felt like to have something worth saying. At the end of the evening, when the gallery was emptying and the lights were going softer, she looked at the winter morning photograph for a long time. "That's the porch," I said. She looked at me sideways. "I know it's the porch, Miles. Just making sure." She almost laughed. "It's my favorite one I've taken here," she said, "because it looks like what it felt like. The first morning I came down and understood I wasn't just passing through." I looked at the photograph. The porch in the snow, the light in the window, the smoke from the wood stove drifting sideways in the cold. Something Clara had built, something that had become ours. I didn't say that out loud. I didn't need to. She was already looking at me with the expression that meant she understood. We drove home to Cedar Lake in the spring dark. Finn met us at the door like we had been gone for years rather than an evening. The kitchen smelled like coffee and old wood. The porch swing faced the lake, the way Clara had always wanted it to. Some things survive. Some things that were built to last do. And some mornings you come downstairs to 2 cups of coffee already made, and the camera bag by the door, and a dog asleep in the good chair, and the lake out the window doing what it always does. And the word you come back to, over and over, for all the ordinary reasons, is stay.